The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Pecos, Texas. As Rose O'Malley stumbled down the boardwalk, clutching a crumpled telegram that had shattered what little remained of her world. The year was 1875, and in the span of a single week, she had lost everything: her father to a mining accident, their ranch to debtors, and now, the last sliver of hope in the form of a tersely worded message from her estranged uncle declining to help. Rose was 22, alone in the unforgiving West, with only $3 to her name and the clothes on her back. Her chestnut hair tumbled from its pins as she sank onto the steps of the general store, her blue eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall. Not here, not in public where the vultures of Pecos could witness her desperation. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep, tinged with a southern drawl that reminded her of home, a home that no longer existed. Rose looked up to find a man standing before her, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a well-worn Stetson, but she could make out a strong jawline darkened by stubble and eyes the color of warm whiskey. "I'm fine," she lied, hastily folding the telegram and stuffing it into her pocket. "Just resting a moment." The stranger's gaze dropped to her threadbare carpet bag, then back to her face. "You don't look fine, madam. Pardon my forwardness." Rose stood abruptly, smoothing her dusty skirts with trembling hands. "Then I shall have to work on my appearance, sir. Good evening." She attempted to step past him, but her body betrayed her fatigue, hunger, and despair conspiring to make her knees buckle. The stranger caught her elbow, steadying her with a surprisingly gentle grip for hands so calloused. "Blake Kearney," he said simply. "I own the Triple K ranch just outside town. Whatever trouble you're in, Miss O'Malley," she supplied reluctantly. "Rose O'Malley. Miss O'Malley. Pecos can be unkind to those without friends. Let me help." Rose wrenched her arm away. "I don't need charity, Mr. Kearney, especially not from a man I've just met on a street corner." A flicker of amusement crossed his weathered features. "Not charity. A meal, perhaps, and some information about work if that's what you're looking for." He gestured toward a modest building across the street with a painted sign reading, "Harper's Cafe." Rose hesitated. Pride warred with practicality as her empty stomach growled audibly. Blake Kearney didn't look like the type of man who would take advantage. His clothes were simple but clean, his manner direct but respectful. More importantly, she had nowhere else to go, and night was falling fast in a town where a woman alone was easy prey. "One meal," she conceded. "And I'll pay you back." "If that's what makes you comfortable," he replied, though his expression suggested he had no intention of collecting the debt. The cafe was warm and smelled of fresh bread and coffee, a sharp contrast to the dusty street outside. A plump woman with silver-streaked hair greeted Blake with familiar ease. "Evening, Mr. Kearney. Your usual table." "Thank you, Mrs. Harper, and whatever your special is tonight for the lady and myself." Rose followed him to a corner table, aware of curious glances from the other patrons. Pecos was small enough that newcomers were noticed, especially those in the company of Blake Kearney, who she was beginning to suspect was a man of some importance here. "You're not from around here," he stated once they were seated, removing his hat to reveal thick sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "No, I'm from Missouri originally. My father and I came west 2 years ago for his health." Rose paused as Mrs. Harper placed steaming cups of coffee before them. "He passed last week. Mining accident near Silver City." Blake's expression sobered. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss O'Malley." "Thank you." She warmed her hands on the cup, drawing strength from its simple comfort. The mine owner said it wasn't his responsibility. No compensation, not even for burial costs. The bank took our homestead for unpaid loans, and here I am. And the telegram. Bad news, I'm guessing. Rose glanced up, surprised by his perception. My uncle in Kansas City. My last relative. He can't help either. Blake nodded, not pressing for details, which Rose appreciated. The food arrived, hearty beef stew with dumplings, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. What were your plans? Before the telegram? Rose stirred her stew absently. I have secretarial training. I thought perhaps I could find work with a business or law office, but Pecos seems smaller than I anticipated. It is that, Blake agreed. Judge Harmon might need help with his paperwork, but he's away until next month. The bank has a clerk already. Sheriff, too. He took a sip of coffee, considering. My ranch foreman's wife runs a small school for the children of the area. She could use an assistant. I have experience teaching, Rose admitted, hope flickering briefly. But without lodgings, there's a cabin on my property. It's modest but sound. Previously housed my former ranch manager before he moved east with his bride. Blake's offer was casual, matter of fact. You'd have privacy, safety, and time to get your bearings. Rose tensed. Mr. Kearney, if you think I'm the kind of woman who I don't, he interrupted firmly. Miss O'Malley, I employ a dozen men and 3 families on my ranch. My sister visits from Austin regularly and would have my hide if I ever behaved improperly toward a lady. This is a practical offer, nothing more. Rose studied him, searching for deceit and finding none. Still, caution prevailed. Why would you help a complete stranger? Blake's expression turned distant, as though looking into a past only he could see. 7 years ago, I was broke in a strange town after the war took everything. Someone gave me a chance when they didn't have to. I believe in passing that forward. He met her gaze directly. 1 week. If you're uncomfortable or find better prospects, you leave with no questions asked. The stew was settling warmly in Rose's stomach, the first real meal she'd had in days. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, and with it, her options dwindled further. Sleep in the stables if they'd let her, or accept this improbable offer from a man whose eyes held no guile she could detect. 1 week, she echoed, her voice steadier than she felt. And I work for my keep, Mr. Kearney. I won't be indebted. Blake, he corrected with a slight smile. And I wouldn't have it any other way, Miss O'Malley. Rose, she returned, extending her hand across the table in a gesture more businesslike than feminine. His large hand enveloped hers briefly, the contact sending an unexpected warmth up her arm that she attributed to exhaustion and relief. What she couldn't explain was the strange certainty that this handshake was somehow significant, a dividing line between the life she'd lost and whatever awaited her at Triple K Ranch. The journey to Blake's ranch took nearly an hour by wagon, following a winding dirt road that left the lights of Pecos behind and plunged into the vast Texas night. Rose sat stiffly beside him on the wagon bench, her carpet bag clutched in her lap, every creak and groan of the vehicle amplified by her nerves. It's just ahead, Blake said, breaking a long silence. You'll see the lights soon. True to his word, pinpricks of golden light appeared through the darkness, gradually resolving into the windows of a substantial ranch house and several outbuildings. As they drew closer, Rose could make out a sprawling 2-story main house built of local stone and timber, its wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Smaller cabins and bunkhouses were scattered nearby, along with barns and corrals. It's larger than I expected, Rose admitted as Blake brought the wagon to a halt before the main house. Started small after the war, he replied, jumping down and coming around to help her. Been adding bit by bit each year. Rose hesitated before accepting his outstretched hand, her feet finding solid ground with relief after the bumpy ride. A tall, slender woman appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. "Mr. Kearney, we weren't expecting you back tonight. Change of plans, Mrs. Tanner. This is Miss Rose O'Malley. She'll be staying in the old manager's cabin and possibly helping your school." Mrs. Tanner, 40ish, with kind eyes and graying blonde hair, smiled warmly at Rose. "Well, that's wonderful news. I've been praying for help with those little rascals. 23 children now, if you can believe it. Frank's baby just turned 4, so she's joining us too." Rose managed a tired smile in return, grateful for the woman's immediate acceptance. "The cabin will need airing out," Blake said. "Miss O'Malley, perhaps you'd like to rest here while Mrs. Tanner and I get it ready. I can help," Rose insisted, reluctant to be more of a burden. "Tomorrow," Mrs. Tanner said firmly, linking her arm through Rose's and guiding her toward the house. "Tonight you'll have supper with us and sleep in our spare room. The cabin will keep till morning." Too weary to argue, Rose allowed herself to be led inside, where the warmth and savory smells enveloped her like an embrace. The main room was spacious but homey, with worn but clean furnishings and a massive stone fireplace where flames crackled cheerfully. "Frank," Mrs. Tanner called, "set another place for supper. We've got company." A stocky man with a handlebar mustache emerged from what appeared to be a study, reading glasses perched on his nose and a ledger in hand. "Company." His gaze fell on Rose and his bushy eyebrows rose. "Well, hello there. This is Miss O'Malley," Blake explained. "She's taking the old cabin and helping Sarah with the school." Frank Tanner's expression registered surprise but no objection as he extended a hand to Rose. "Welcome to Triple K, Miss O'Malley. Any friend of the boss is welcome here." "Thank you, Mr. Tanner," Rose replied, the simple kindness of these people bringing a lump to her throat that she struggled to swallow. Supper was a relaxed affair around a large oak table, with Sarah Tanner's excellent cooking and easy conversation. Rose learned that Frank had been with Blake since the beginning, helping build the ranch from nearly nothing after Blake returned from the war with only his horse and determination. "The man worked like 2 mules those first years," Frank recalled, helping himself to more potatoes. "Slept in a tent while we built the first cabin. Now look at all this." Blake shook his head modestly. "Would have been nothing without good people. I was lucky to find the Tanners early on." "And now you've found Miss O'Malley," Sarah said brightly, passing Rose a basket of fresh rolls. "Just when we needed her," Rose flushed under their combined gazes. "I haven't agreed to stay beyond a week," she reminded them, "and I don't know if I'm qualified to teach." "Did you get proper schooling?" Sarah asked. "Yes, my mother insisted. I completed secondary education and had a year at a women's college before she passed." "That's more than I ever had," Sarah said, impressed. "Most of these children just need reading, writing, and figures, though there's a few older ones who could benefit from more if you've got it to give." The conversation continued, with Rose finding herself drawn in despite her caution. By the time the meal ended, she had agreed to visit the schoolhouse the next day and meet some of the children. As Frank and Blake stepped outside to discuss ranch business, Sarah showed Rose to a small but comfortable bedroom with a patchwork quilt on the bed and a pitcher and basin on the dresser. "There's fresh water, and I've left one of my nightgowns," Sarah said. "It might be a bit large, but it's clean." "You're very kind," Rose said quietly. "I don't know how to thank you all." Sarah touched her arm gently. "You've had a rough time, haven't you? No need to tell me the details, but I recognize that look. I had it myself once before Frank found me." Rose hesitated, then nodded. "It's been difficult." "Well, you're safe now. Whatever brought you here, perhaps it was Providence." Sarah patted her hand. "Rest well, Miss O'Malley. Morning comes early on a ranch." Left alone, Rose sank onto the bed, the events of the day catching up to her in a rush of emotion. How strange that this morning she had awakened in a cheerless rented room, her last hopes pinned on a telegram that ultimately crushed them, and tonight she lay in a clean bed under the roof of strangers who treated her like a welcome guest. Blake Kearney's face floated in her mind as exhaustion claimed her, those whiskey-colored eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal, the unexpected gentleness in hands roughened by years of labor. What kind of man extended such help to a stranger? In her experience, men always wanted something in return. Yet something told her Blake was different. Whether that difference represented safety or greater danger remained to be seen. Morning arrived with the crowing of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. Rose woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came flooding back. She dressed hastily in her travel-worn clothes, wishing she had something fresher to wear for her first full day at Triple K. The main house was already bustling with activity when she emerged. Sarah Tanner was cooking at a massive cast-iron stove while Blake and Frank sat at the table discussing the day's work over coffee. "Good morning," Rose said hesitantly from the doorway. Three heads turned her way, but it was Blake's gaze that held hers direct and warming in a way that made her cheeks flush inexplicably. "Morning, Miss O'Malley," he replied, rising from his chair. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you." Sarah bustled over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Come sit. Eggs and ham nearly ready and the biscuits just came out of the oven." "I don't want to impose nonsense," Frank interjected. "Can't start work on an empty stomach. That's ranch law." Rose took the offered chair, acutely aware of Blake's presence across the table. In the daylight, she could better appreciate his features, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his hair curled slightly where it met his collar. He was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or 32, with the weathered look of a man who spent most of his life outdoors. "I thought I'd show you the cabin after breakfast," he said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Then the schoolhouse if you're still interested." "I am," Rose confirmed, accepting the cup gratefully. "I'd like to make myself useful while I'm here." Breakfast passed pleasantly, and soon Rose found herself walking beside Blake toward a small cabin set apart from the main house by about 100 yards. Morning sunlight bathed the landscape in gold, revealing the full extent of Triple K Ranch. Rolling pastures stretched as far as she could see, dotted with grazing cattle. In the distance, mountains rose blue against the horizon. Closer at hand, horses nickered in corrals and ranch hands moved purposefully about their morning chores, tipping their hats respectfully when they spotted Blake. "It's beautiful," Rose admitted, drinking in the vastness of it all. After the cramped mining town and her father's small homestead, the ranch's expansiveness was breathtaking. "Takes getting used to," Blake replied. "All this space. First year I sometimes felt like I might blow away in the wind, nothing to hold me down." He glanced at her. "But it grows on you. Becomes part of you." They reached the cabin, a solid structure built of logs with a small covered porch. Blake opened the door and Rose stepped inside to find a surprisingly cozy space. One large room served as both sitting area and kitchen, with a pot-bellied stove for cooking and heat. A doorway led to a small bedroom with a simple bed frame, recently made up with clean linens. Curtains, faded but freshly laundered, hung at the windows. "Mrs. Tanner came early to ready it," Blake explained, noting Rose's surprise at the prepared state of the cabin. "There's wood stacked outside for the stove, and the pump at the back draws clean well water." Rose ran her fingertips over the rough-hewn table in the center of the main room. "It's more than adequate, far more than I expected." It's basic, Blake said, watching her closely, but private. My men know better than to come near without invitation. The implication that her safety was assured loosened something tight in Rose's chest. Thank you for all of this. Blake's expression softened, and for a moment, Rose thought he might say something more personal. Instead, he cleared his throat and gestured toward the door. Should we see the schoolhouse next? It's just past those cottonwoods. The schoolhouse proved to be a long, single-room building with rows of simple desks and a larger desk at the front for the teacher. Bookshelves lined one wall, sparsely filled with well-worn volumes. We're always short on books, Sarah Tanner explained, having joined them there. But we make do. The children come 3 days a week: Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Ages 4 to 15, though the older ones often miss during busy seasons. How many children currently? Rose asked, already mentally organizing lessons. 23 total, though rarely all at once, mostly ranch hands' children and some from neighboring homesteads. Rose moved to the teacher's desk, running her hands along its scarred surface. Teaching had always come naturally to her. Her brief stint at college had included assisting with younger students. The familiar setting calmed her, offering a sense of purpose after weeks of uncertainty. I can start tomorrow, she decided. If you'll show me your current lessons, I'll prepare tonight. Sarah beamed. Oh, that's wonderful. The children will be so excited. I'll bring you everything this afternoon. As they walked back toward the cabin, Blake fell into step beside Rose. You seemed at home in there, he observed. Teaching makes sense to me, Rose admitted. There's order to it, structure. Unlike the chaos her life had become, Blake nodded thoughtfully. We all need that, something that makes sense when the rest doesn't. His perception startled her. What makes sense to you, Mr. Kearney? This land, he answered without hesitation. Cattle. Knowing exactly what needs doing from sunup to sundown, he paused. And it's Blake, remember? Rose smiled faintly. Blake, then. Though perhaps Mr. Kearney is more appropriate given your position here. Position doesn't mean much in these parts. Results do. He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. Miss O'Malley, Rose, I want you to know that your arrangement here is between us. You don't owe me or anyone else explanations about your past. All that matters is what you choose to do from today forward. The sincerity in his eyes caught her off guard. After weeks of judgment, suspicion, and thinly veiled propositions from men who saw a woman alone as fair game, Blake's straightforward acceptance was almost too much to bear. I appreciate that, she managed, her voice slightly unsteady. More than I can express. A call from one of the ranch hands saved her from having to say more. Blake excused himself, promising to check on her later, and Rose continued to the cabin alone, her thoughts in turmoil. This unexpected sanctuary couldn't last, she knew that. Eventually, Blake would tire of Charity, or she would wear out her welcome with the Tanners. Yet for the first time since receiving word of her father's death, Rose allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival. A future where perhaps she might rebuild something of the life she'd lost, piece by broken piece. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity as Rose settled into life at Triple K Ranch. The schoolhouse quickly became her domain, and she discovered a genuine talent for engaging even the most reluctant students. The children, starved for structured learning, responded enthusiastically to her methods, particularly her afternoon reading sessions where she brought characters and faraway places to life. Sarah Tanner became a fast friend, teaching Rose the practicalities of ranch life, how to manage the temperamental stove, preserve vegetables from the kitchen garden, and even basic medical care for minor injuries and illnesses. You never know when you'll need to stitch a cut or bring down a fever out here, Sarah explained as she showed Rose how to prepare willow bark tea. Doctor's a half-day's ride in good weather. As for Blake, he remained something of an enigma. He was unfailingly polite in their interactions, checking regularly to ensure Rose had everything she needed, but maintained a careful distance that both relieved and, oddly, disappointed her. His days were consumed with ranch work, especially as autumn approached, bringing cattle drives and preparation for winter. Rose occasionally caught him watching her from a distance when she was hanging laundry outside her cabin, or walking with the children during outdoor lessons. Those moments sent an inexplicable flutter through her chest that she firmly attributed to lingering insecurity about her position. One crisp October afternoon, nearly a month after her arrival at Triple K, Rose was returning from the schoolhouse with an armful of student work to review when she spotted a horse and rider approaching at speed. As they drew closer, she recognized Blake, bent low over his mount's neck, his expression grim. He pulled up sharply when he spotted her. "Miss O'Malley, good, I need your help," he called, dismounting swiftly. Young Jimmy Howard fell from the hayloft, broken arm, maybe worse. His mother's away visiting family in Austin. "I'm no doctor," Rose protested, alarmed. "Sarah's gone with Frank to Pecos for supplies. You've got the steadiest hands here besides hers." Blake's urgency left no room for refusal. "They're bringing him to the main house. Every minute counts." Rose dropped her papers on her porch and hurried alongside Blake toward the main house, where two ranch hands were carefully carrying a small, pale-faced boy through the front door. Jimmy Howard was 10 years old, one of her quieter students with a gift for mathematics. Now his freckles stood out starkly against his white face, his lips pressed together to suppress sobs of pain. His right arm hung at an unnatural angle, and blood seeped through his torn shirt. "Put him on the table," Blake instructed, clearing away the breakfast dishes with one sweep of his arm. "Gently now." Rose pushed aside her fear, calling on composure she hadn't known she possessed. "I need hot water, clean cloths, whiskey for the pain, and splinting materials." "Do you have any laudanum?" "Medicine cabinet in Sarah's room," Blake replied, already moving. "Jimmy, son, Miss O'Malley's going to help you. She knows what to do." The lie was kind but terrifying. Rose knew only what she'd observed from the town doctor treating her father and what Sarah had shown her. Still, she smiled reassuringly at the boy. "This will hurt, Jimmy, but we'll make it better." "Can you be brave for me?" The child nodded, a tear escaping despite his efforts. What followed was a harrowing hour of Rose working to clean, set, and splint Jimmy's broken arm while Blake assisted, handing her what she needed without being asked, supporting the boy's weight when necessary, and murmuring constant encouragement to them both. The break was clean, fortunately, with no bone piercing the skin, though a nasty gash from a nail in the barn required careful cleaning and stitching. Jimmy eventually succumbed to exhaustion and laudanum, sleeping fitfully as Rose finished bandaging his arm in a secure splint. "Will he be all right?" Blake asked softly, his face drawn with concern. "I think so," Rose replied, washing blood from her hands in a basin. "The bone should heal cleanly if he keeps it still. The cut worries me more. Infection is the danger now." Blake's hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm and steady. "You did well. Better than well." Rose looked up at him, suddenly aware of their proximity and the intimacy of the moment, both of them disheveled, emotionally drained, connected by the shared urgency of saving a child from lasting harm. "I was terrified," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Couldn't tell," Blake said, his thumb moving slightly against her collarbone. "You were calm as still water." Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that had nothing to do with the medical emergency. Rose became acutely conscious of Blake's height, the breadth of his shoulders, the faint scent of leather and prairie grass that seemed to cling to him. The front door burst open, shattering the moment as Sarah and Frank Tanner rushed in, faces alarmed. "We heard about Jimmy as we were coming back," Sarah exclaimed, hurrying to the sleeping boy. "Oh, the poor child!" Rose stepped back from Blake, flustered by what had almost happened, what she had almost allowed herself to feel. He should sleep through the night with the laudanum. The break was clean, but the wound needs watching for infection. Sarah examined Rose's handiwork with approval. "This is excellent work. Where did you learn to set bones?" "I watched the doctor treat miners," Rose explained, avoiding Blake's gaze, "and I remembered what you showed me." "Well, I couldn't have done better myself," Sarah declared. "Frank, help me move him to the spare room. He shouldn't be jostled back to the bunkhouse tonight." As the Tanners carefully transferred Jimmy to a proper bed, Blake and Rose were left alone in the main room, the intensity of their shared experience hanging between them. "I should go," Rose said, reaching for her shawl. "It's getting late." Blake nodded but made no move to step away. "I'll walk you." "There's no need, please," he said quietly. "Allow me that much." The night air was crisp, stars pricking the velvet darkness above as they walked in silence toward Rose's cabin. The events of the day had left her emotionally raw, more vulnerable than she'd allowed herself to be since arriving at Triple K. "I never thanked you properly," she said abruptly as they reached her porch. "For what?" Blake asked. "For everything. Taking me in. Giving me purpose again." Rose wrapped her arms around herself against the evening chill. "I was at the end of my rope that day in Pecos." Blake's expression softened in the moonlight. "We've all been there, at the end of something, waiting for the beginning of something else." "Is that what this is?" she asked. "A beginning." The question hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. "Could be," Blake answered carefully, "if you wanted it to be." Rose felt a tremor pass through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "I should go inside." Blake nodded, respecting her retreat. "Good night, Miss O'Malley." "Good night, Blake." Inside her cabin, Rose leaned against the closed door, her heart racing with confusion. This was dangerous territory, developing feelings for the man who employed her, who had saved her from destitution. Her position was already precarious. Emotional entanglement would only complicate matters further. Yet as she readied herself for bed, Rose couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her at the memory of Blake's hand on her shoulder, the admiration in his eyes as they worked together to help Jimmy. For the first time in years, she had felt truly seen, not as a burden or an obligation, but as a person of value. That feeling, more than anything, terrified her. The morning brought news that Jimmy was running a fever. Rose hurried to the main house at dawn to find Sarah bathing the boy's forehead with cool cloths while Blake paced nearby, his face tight with worry. "Infection?" Rose asked, moving immediately to examine the wound. Sarah nodded grimly. "Started during the night. I've given him willow bark tea, but it's not bringing the fever down." The cut was angry and red, heat radiating from the surrounding skin despite Rose's careful cleaning the day before. Jimmy moaned in his sleep, his small face flushed with fever. "We need to clean it again," Rose decided. "And poultice it. My father swore by a drawing salve the miners used. Do you have plantain and comfrey in my herb garden?" Sarah confirmed. "I'll gather them right away." Blake followed Rose's movements as she gently removed the bandages. "Is it bad?" "It could be worse," she answered honestly. "But we need to act quickly. Fever like this can take a child fast." His jaw tightened. "Whatever you need, just name it. Jimmy's father died last winter, pneumonia. His mother's worked in our kitchen ever since. Good woman. He's all she has left." The weight of responsibility settled more firmly on Rose's shoulders. Then we won't let her lose him too. What followed was a long day of tending the boy, reapplying poultices, coaxing water and broth between his cracked lips, and monitoring his fever. Blake delegated his ranch duties to Frank, remaining close at hand, fetching fresh water and supplies whenever needed. By nightfall, Jimmy's fever had broken and he was sleeping naturally, his breathing deep and even. Rose sat beside his bed, exhaustion etched in every line of her body. "You should rest," Blake said softly from the doorway. "I'll watch him for a while." Rose shook her head. "I want to be sure he's past the danger. At least eat something then." Blake approached with a bowl of stew. Sarah insisted. She accepted the food gratefully, suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd eaten. Blake pulled up a chair beside her, his presence reassuring in the quiet room. "You're good at this," he observed. "Healing, teaching. Seems you have a gift for restoring things." Rose smiled faintly. "Ironic, considering how broken my own life has been." The words slipped out before she could stop them, an admission she hadn't intended to make. Blake was quiet for a long moment. "Broken doesn't mean beyond repair. Some things are stronger where they've been mended. Is that experience talking?" She asked, meeting his gaze. "Could say that." He rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a jagged scar that ran from wrist to elbow. "Shrapnel at Gettysburg. Doctor wanted to take the arm. Another surgeon disagreed, pieced it back together. Doesn't work quite the same, but it's mine." Rose fought the urge to touch the scar, to trace the physical evidence of his survival. "The war took much from you." "Took something from everyone who lived through it," Blake replied. "But it's what we built after that matters." They fell silent, watching Jimmy's peaceful sleep, connected by the shared victory over death's threat, and something deeper neither was ready to name. When Jimmy's mother returned 3 days later to find her son recovering well in Miss O'Malley's care, her gratitude was overwhelming. Martha Howard was a sturdy woman with the same freckles as her son and a quiet dignity that reminded Rose of her own mother. "I don't know how to thank you," Martha said, clasping Rose's hands tightly. "If I'd lost Jimmy too." Her voice broke. "He did most of the healing himself," Rose assured her. "He's a strong boy." "Takes after his pa that way," Martha agreed, wiping away tears. "Mr. Kearney says you barely left his side for 2 days." Rose glanced toward Blake, who stood talking with Frank nearby, apparently unaware of their conversation. "Anyone would have done the same." "No, madam, they wouldn't." Martha's tone was firm. "Most would have sent for the doctor and hoped for the best. You saved my boy's life, and I won't forget it." The incident changed Rose's standing at Triple K. The ranch hands tipped their hats more respectfully when they passed her. The children in her school regarded her with newfound awe, and invitations to Sunday dinners at various ranch families' homes became regular occurrences. As autumn deepened toward winter, Rose found herself increasingly integrated into the life of the ranch and the small community it supported. Her initial plan to stay only a week had long been abandoned, though she had insisted on paying a small rent for the cabin, once her teaching position was formalized with a modest salary. Blake's manner toward her had subtly shifted as well. He sought her company more often, finding reasons to visit the schoolhouse or her cabin, bringing books he thought she might enjoy for her students, or simply stopping by to inquire about her day. They fell into a habit of evening walks when weather permitted, discussions ranging from ranch management to literature to their disparate childhoods, his in Virginia before the war destroyed his family's plantation, hers in the genteel poverty of a Missouri minister's home. "Did you ever imagine ending up here?" Rose asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Running a cattle ranch in Texas, Blake chuckled. Not once. I was studying law before the war, if you can believe it, had notions of politics. I can see that, Rose mused, studying his profile. Senator Kearney has a certain ring to it. God forbid, he replied with genuine horror. Give me honest cattle any day over politicians. Their laughter mingled in the crisp air, easy and unforced. These moments had become precious to Rose, though she tried not to examine too closely why that might be. As they turned back toward her cabin, Blake's expression grew more serious. Christmas is coming in a few weeks, he said. The ranch always has a celebration, big dinner, music, gifts for the children. Sarah mentioned you might be willing to help organize it this year. I'd be happy to, Rose agreed. The children have been asking about Christmas preparations already. Good. That's good. Blake seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. There's a dance, too, traditionally. Nothing fancy like back east, but the families enjoy it. Rose waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. Blake cleared his throat. I wondered if you might do me the honor of saving me a dance or two. The formal phrasing, so at odds with their usual easy conversation, brought a smile to Rose's lips. I'd like that very much. His answering smile lit his eyes in a way that sent a now familiar warmth through her chest. Until tomorrow, then, Miss O'Malley. Until tomorrow, Mr. Kearney. As she watched him walk back toward the main house, Rose acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Blake Kearney. The realization should have terrified her. Love had only ever brought her loss and pain, but instead, it settled in her heart with the comfortable weight of something that had been there all along, simply waiting to be recognized. The Christmas preparations consumed much of Rose's time in the following weeks. She organized the children to create decorations for the main house and schoolroom, rehearsed them for a simple nativity play, and worked with Sarah and the other ranch women to plan the feast. Blake had a tree cut and brought to the main house, which became the center of much excitement as it was decorated with strings of dried berries, paper ornaments, and precious glass baubles that Blake's sister had sent from Austin. 3 days before Christmas, a fierce winter storm descended on the region, bringing howling winds and freezing temperatures that confined everyone to their dwellings. Rose huddled in her cabin, feeding the pot-bellied stove more frequently as the cold intensified. By evening, the wind had risen to a shriek, finding every crack in the cabin's solid but aging walls. A pounding on her door startled her from the book she'd been trying to focus on. She opened it to find Blake, snow dusting his shoulders and hat, his face red from the cold. You need to come to the main house, he said without preamble. This storm's worse than we thought. Temperatures dropping fast. I'm fine here, Rose, he interrupted, his use of her first name underlining his seriousness. 3 people froze to death in a storm like this 2 years back. Your stove won't keep up once it gets below 0, which it will by midnight. The genuine concern in his eyes convinced her more than his words. Give me a moment to gather some things. She hastily packed a small bag with necessities and wrapped herself in every layer she could manage. Blake took the bag from her, then surprised her by unwinding the scarf from his own neck and wrapping it carefully around hers. Keep your face covered, he instructed. Frostbite takes hold quick. The journey to the main house, normally a brief walk, became a brutal struggle against wind-driven snow and bitter cold. Blake gripped her arm firmly, keeping her close as they fought their way forward. By the time they reached the porch, Rose could barely feel her feet, and her face burned with cold despite the scarf. Inside, the main house was transformed. The large central room had become a makeshift dormitory, with pallets arranged around the massive fireplace where a roaring fire defied the storm's fury. Martha Howard and her son were already there, along with two other families from the outlying cabins. The ranch hands had been consolidated in the bunkhouse, which had its own substantial fireplace. "Miss Rose," Jimmy called out, waving excitedly from his place near the fire, his splinted arm now supporting only a light bandage. Sarah bustled forward, helping Rose out of her frozen outer garments. "Thank goodness Blake went for you. I was worried sick when the temperature started dropping." "I didn't realize it would be so severe," Rose admitted, allowing herself to be guided to the fire, where feeling began returning to her extremities with painful intensity. "Texas weather," Frank Tanner said philosophically, offering her a mug of hot cider. "Mild as milk one day, deadly the next. Best to respect it." Blake returned from conferring with several ranch hands at the door. "Animals are secured as best we can manage. Now we wait it out." The evening developed a strangely festive atmosphere despite, or perhaps because of the danger lurking outside. Stories were shared, children played quiet games, and Martha Howard revealed a beautiful singing voice that led them all in carols. Rose found herself seated beside Blake on a bench near the fire, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they joined in the impromptu entertainment. "Not exactly how I planned to spend the evening," he murmured during a lull in the singing, "but I find I can't complain about the company." Rose smiled, aware of a pleasurable tension between them that seemed heightened by the storm's drama and their forced proximity. "Nor can I." As the night deepened, sleeping arrangements were sorted. The children and their mothers took the bedrooms, while the men prepared to sleep in the main room. Rose was offered Sarah and Frank's room, but she declined. "I'm perfectly comfortable here by the fire," she insisted. "I've imposed enough." Sarah looked unconvinced but didn't argue. She provided Rose with blankets and a pillow, arranging a pallet for her in a sheltered corner of the room with as much privacy as could be managed. Hours later, with the house quiet except for the storm's continued assault and the occasional snore from the men sleeping nearby, Rose lay awake. The events of the past months played through her mind like pages from a novel: her desperate arrival in Pecos, Blake's unexpected intervention, the gradual rebuilding of her life at Triple K. Each memory featured Blake at its center, his steady presence a foundation she had come to rely on perhaps too heavily. A shadow fell across her palette, and she looked up to find Blake standing nearby, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly, mindful of the others. Rose shook her head, sitting up and wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Too much thinking." "Mind some company for those thoughts." At her nod, he lowered himself to sit beside her, careful to maintain a proper distance despite the intimate setting. "What were you thinking about?" he asked. Rose hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Everything that's happened since we met. How different my life might have been if I hadn't been sitting on those steps that evening." "I've thought about that too," Blake admitted. "What if I'd left town earlier that day or taken a different route back to the Mercantile?" "Do you believe in Providence, Blake?" The question emerged unbidden, reflecting her earlier conversation with Sarah. He considered this seriously. "I believe life offers crossroads. Moments when everything can change direction based on a single choice. Whether that's providence or chance, I couldn't say." "And our meeting, which was that?" Blake turned to face her fully, the firelight casting his features into sharp relief. "Don't know that it matters what brought us to that moment. What matters is what we do with what comes after." The weight of his gaze made Rose's heart quicken. "And what comes after this?" "That depends," he said quietly, "on what you want, Rose." The simplicity of the question belied its complexity. What did she want? Security, certainly. Purpose, definitely. But beyond those practical concerns lay deeper longings she'd barely allowed herself to acknowledge for connection, for someone to share both burdens and joys, for love that wouldn't end in abandonment or loss. "I want," she began, then faltered. "I'm afraid to want anything. Every time I've dared to hope for something lasting, it's been taken from me." Blake's expression softened. "I understand that fear better than most." "Do you?" she challenged gently. "You've built all this, created something permanent." "Land and cattle can be lost as easily as anything else," he replied. "Drought, disease, bad markets, it's all vulnerable. I learned that lesson young." He paused, his next words careful. "But there's a difference between acknowledging life's uncertainty and letting it stop you from living fully." Outside, the wind howled like a living creature, emphasizing their shelter's fragility against nature's power. Inside, the space between them seemed charged with possibility and risk in equal measure. "What do you want, Blake?" Rose asked, turning his question back on him. His answer came without hesitation. "You, here at Triple K, not as my teacher or my tenant, but as—" He stopped, seeming to search for the right words. "As what?" Rose pressed, her voice barely audible. "As my partner, my equal, my wife, if you'd consider it." The words emerged in a rush, as though he'd been holding them back for too long. Rose's breath caught. Despite the growing connection between them, despite her own acknowledged feelings, she hadn't expected such a direct declaration. "Blake, I don't answer now," he interrupted gently. "It's not a decision to make in the middle of a blizzard. I just needed you to know where I stand." The firelight flickered across his face, revealing a vulnerability she rarely glimpsed in this man who carried so many responsibilities on his shoulders. In that moment, Rose saw clearly that despite his success, despite the respect he commanded, Blake Kearney was as susceptible to doubt and fear as she was, especially in matters of the heart. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally, reaching out to briefly touch his hand. "For trusting me with that." He caught her fingers, holding them lightly. "Get some rest, Rose. Storm should pass by morning." As he released her hand and moved away to his own makeshift bed, Rose lay back down, her mind reeling. Sleep seemed impossible now, with Blake's words echoing in her thoughts and her heart racing with emotions too complex to untangle in the dark. By morning, as predicted, the storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white broken only by the stark shapes of buildings and fences. The temperature remained brutally cold, but the immediate danger had passed. Rose avoided direct interaction with Blake as the temporary refugees sorted themselves out, returning to their own dwellings or helping clear paths through the deep snow. She needed time to think, to examine her feelings without the pressure of his presence. Christmas arrived 2 days later with a welcome, warming trend that allowed the planned celebration to proceed. The main house was filled with laughter and music as ranch families gathered for the feast and festivities. Rose threw herself into organizing the children's performance, grateful for the distraction from her personal dilemma. Blake maintained a respectful distance, watching her from across rooms but never approaching directly. His restraint both relieved and frustrated her, evidence of his promise not to pressure her for an answer, yet also a reminder of the choice that loomed between them. The dance began after sundown, with furniture pushed back to create space, and several ranch hands providing music with fiddles, a harmonica, and a battered piano that had been transported at great expense from San Antonio the previous year. Couples formed as Frank Tanner called out the steps for a lively Virginia reel. Rose stood to the side, watching the dancers with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had worn her best dress, a dark green wool with modest lace trim that had survived her journey and subsequent hardships remarkably well. Sarah had helped her arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than usual, secured with her mother's silver combs, one of the few keepsakes she'd managed to retain. "You look beautiful," came Blake's voice from beside her, startling her from her thoughts. Rose turned to find him watching her with undisguised admiration. He had dressed for the occasion as well, in a clean white shirt, dark waistcoat, and trousers that emphasized his height and the breadth of his shoulders. "Thank you," she replied, fighting a blush. "You're quite handsome yourself." "I believe you promised me a dance," he reminded her, extending his hand as the music shifted to a slower waltz. Rose hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his, allowing him to lead her onto the makeshift dance floor. His arm circled her waist properly, maintaining a respectable distance between them as they began to move in time with the music. "I've been thinking about what you said," she admitted after a few moments of silence. "During the storm." Blake's step faltered almost imperceptibly before he recovered. "Have you now?" "Yes." Rose gathered her courage. "I've been trying to understand why I'm so afraid to answer." "And have you figured it out?" His tone was carefully neutral, but his hand tightened slightly on hers. "I think so." She met his gaze directly. "I'm afraid because accepting happiness means acknowledging I have something precious to lose again." Understanding dawned in Blake's eyes. "Rose, please, let me finish," she interrupted softly. "My father always said courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. I haven't been very courageous lately. I've been so focused on protecting myself from more pain that I've been blind to the joy right in front of me." The dance had carried them toward the edge of the room, slightly apart from the other couples. Blake slowed their steps further, his full attention on her words. "And what joy is that?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "You," Rose answered simply. "This place. The life we could build together." She took a deep breath. "If your offer still stands, my answer is yes." Blake stopped dancing entirely, his expression transforming from cautious hope to unmistakable joy. "Rose O'Malley, are you accepting my proposal?" "I am," she confirmed, a smile breaking through her own nervousness. "Though I should warn you, I come with very little except a stubborn streak and a tendency to overwork." "Those sound like assets to me," Blake replied, his hands moving to gently cradle her face. "May I?" At her nod, he lowered his head and kissed her, a brief, tender touch that nonetheless sent warmth cascading through her body. When he pulled back, his eyes were alight with a happiness that mirrored her own unexpected sense of rightness. "They're all watching us, aren't they?" Rose murmured, suddenly aware of the hush that had fallen over the room. "Afraid so," Blake confirmed with a chuckle. "Ranch has few secrets." A smattering of applause broke out, led by Sarah Tanner's enthusiastic clapping, followed by calls for a speech. Blake shook his head good-naturedly, but kept Rose's hand firmly in his as they turned to face their impromptu audience. "Seems we're not fooling anyone," he announced. "Miss O'Malley has done me the great honor of agreeing to become Mrs. Kearney, hopefully before spring roundup." The cheer that erupted was deafening, with stamping feet adding to the cacophony. Rose found herself surrounded by well-wishers, the women embracing her warmly while the men pumped Blake's hand and slapped his back in congratulation. "I told you it was Providence," Sarah whispered in Rose's ear as she hugged her tightly. "Sometimes broken paths lead to the most beautiful destinations." The celebration lasted well into the night, the pending marriage adding an extra layer of joy to the Christmas festivities. By the time Blake walked Rose back to her cabin, properly chaperoned by a grinning Frank Tanner who maintained a discreet distance, she was exhausted, but filled with a contentment she had not experienced in years. "Happy?" Blake asked as they reached her porch. "Very," Rose confirmed, though also a bit overwhelmed. "We can take things as slowly as you need," he assured her, bringing her gloved hand to his lips. "There's no rush." Rose smiled up at him, snowflakes catching in his hair and on the shoulders of his coat. "Actually, I think I've waited long enough for happiness." Spring sounds perfect. They were married 3 months later in the ranch's small chapel, which had been built the previous summer but never properly consecrated until a circuit riding minister arrived to perform the ceremony. Rose wore a gown of ivory silk that Blake's sister had helped procure from Austin, with Sarah's careful alterations making it fit as though made for her. The entire ranch turned out for the occasion, along with neighbors from miles around. Even the sheriff and judge from Pecos made the journey, testament to Blake's standing in the community. Jimmy Howard proudly served as ring bearer, his arm fully healed with only a faint scar to show for his ordeal. As Rose walked toward Blake, who waited at the altar with barely concealed emotion, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of despair on the steps of a general store to this chapel, filled with people who had become family in all but blood, it seemed almost impossible that less than a year had passed. Blake took her hands in his as she reached him, his eyes conveying everything words could not. The minister's voice faded to background as Rose focused on the man before her, the vows they exchanged binding them together as the first step in a new shared life. The celebration afterward was joyous and prolonged, with food and dancing continuing until well after sunset. As darkness fell, Blake and Rose slipped away to the main house, now their shared home, amid good-natured teasing and calls for happiness. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, Rose stood by the window, gazing out at the starlit expanse of Triple K Ranch, her home now in every sense. "Having second thoughts?" Blake asked softly from behind her. Rose turned to find him watching her with a mixture of love and concern. "Not one," she assured him, moving into his embrace, "just marveling at how life can change so completely. For the better, I hope." His arms tightened around her, definitely for the better. Rose rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I was so lost when you found me, so certain nothing good could ever happen again." "You saved yourself, Rose," Blake corrected gently. "I just offered a place to stand while you did it." She looked up at him, this man who had seen her strength when she could only feel her weaknesses. "I think perhaps we saved each other." "I think perhaps you're right," he agreed, bending to kiss her with a tenderness that gradually deepened into passion. As spring bloomed across the Texas landscape, Rose found herself settling into her new role as Mrs. Blake Kearney with surprising ease. She continued teaching at the school 3 days a week, but also embraced the responsibilities of running the ranch house and acting as Blake's partner in business matters, where her organizational skills proved valuable. Their happiness, however, was soon tested by an unexpected development. Blake returned from a trip to Austin with troubling news. A powerful cattle baron named Harrison Webster was buying up water rights throughout the region and pressuring smaller ranchers to sell their land. "He's offered to buy Triple K for a fair price," Blake explained one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Says it's only a matter of time before he controls the entire valley." Rose studied her husband's profile, recognizing the tension in his jaw. "What did you tell him?" "That Triple K isn't for sale at any price." Blake's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "This is our home, our future." "Then we'll fight for it," Rose said simply. "Together." The following months brought increasing pressure from Webster's operation. Access routes to town were mysteriously blocked by fallen trees or washed-out bridges. Cattle from Triple K were found miles from where they should have been, as though deliberately scattered. Most concerning, The creek that provided water to the eastern pastures suddenly diminished to a trickle after Webster purchased the property upstream. Through it all, Blake and Rose presented a united front, working tirelessly to counter each challenge. Rose used her teaching position to keep the community informed and united, while Blake forged alliances with other threatened ranchers. "We need to document everything," Rose insisted one night as Blake returned exhausted from moving cattle to the remaining watered pastures. "Build a case for the territorial court," Blake nodded wearily. "Already started a journal. Frank's taking photographs of the diverted creek when he goes to town tomorrow." Rose moved behind his chair, massaging the tension from his shoulders. "We'll win this, Blake. Webster isn't invincible." "No man is," he agreed, reaching up to capture her hand and press a kiss to her palm. "Having you beside me makes all the difference, you know." "As you beside me," she returned softly. The confrontation came to a head in late summer when Webster himself rode onto Triple K land with a dozen armed men, intercepting Blake and his hands as they worked cattle in the north pasture. Rose was in the schoolhouse when Jimmy Howard burst in with the news. "Mr. Webster's men have surrounded the boss," the boy reported breathlessly. "Pa sent me to warn you." Rose's heart froze, but her mind remained clear. "Jimmy, ride to Sheriff Dalton in Pecos. Tell him armed men have trespassed on Triple K and threats are being made." As the boy dashed off on his errand, Rose gathered the remaining children. "School is dismissed. Go directly to your homes and stay there until your parents come for you." Once the children were safely away, Rose hurried to the main house, her mind racing. There she found Sarah Tanner distributing rifles to the women of the ranch, a precaution Blake had insisted on months earlier. "Frank says they're at the north fence line," Sarah reported, her normally kind face grim. "Webster's demanding Blake sign over the water rights or they'll start shooting cattle." "How many men with Blake?" Rose asked, accepting the rifle Sarah handed her. "6, against Webster's dozen." Rose's decision was immediate: get Martha and the others to secure the house and bunkhouse. "We'll join the men." "Rose, Blake wouldn't want you risking yourself." "Blake would do the same for me," Rose interrupted firmly. "This is our home, Sarah, all of ours. I won't hide while men threaten it." Mounting the horse Frank had left saddled for Sarah, Rose rode hard toward the north pasture, her heart pounding but her resolve steady. She arrived to find a tense standoff Blake and his men on horseback facing Webster's larger force across an open stretch of grassland. Webster himself was immediately identifiable, a corpulent man in expensive Eastern clothes that looked ridiculous on the Texas range, mounted on a showy black stallion. He was speaking as Rose approached, his voice carrying across the distance. "Be reasonable, Kearney. I'm offering good money. More than this scrub land is worth." "This scrub land has been my home for 12 years, Blake replied evenly. "It's not for sale today or any day." Webster's face reddened with anger. "Don't be a fool. Progress is coming to this valley whether you like it or not. Men like you small operators, you're being left behind. The future belongs to operations on the scale only real capital can build." "The future belongs to those who work for it," Blake countered, "not those who steal it." Webster gestured angrily, and his men moved their hands closer to their holstered weapons. "Careful, Kearney. That sounds dangerously close to slander." Rose guided her horse forward to Blake's side, ignoring his startled look of alarm. "It's not slander if it's true, Mr. Webster," she said clearly. "We have documentation of your illegal water diversion, your tampering with our cattle, and your threats against multiple ranchers in this valley." Webster's small eyes narrowed as he took in the composed woman who had joined the confrontation. "And who might you be, madam?" "Mrs. Blake Kearney," Rose replied, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Co-owner of Triple K Ranch. A woman has no business in men's affairs. Webster dismissed her with a wave. Kearney, control your wife before she gets hurt. Blake's expression hardened dangerously. My wife speaks with my full authority, Webster, and she's right, we have proof of your illegal activities. Proof that's already on its way to the territorial governor's office. This was a bluff. They had evidence but hadn't yet sent it, but Webster wouldn't know that. Rose kept her expression neutral, betraying nothing. You're outnumbered, Webster pointed out, his confidence faltering slightly. Even if what you say is true, accidents happen. Tragic ones. Papers get lost. Do they now? Came a new voice as Sheriff Dalton rode into view, accompanied by 6 armed deputies and, to Rose's surprise, Judge Harmon from Pecos. Behind them came another dozen men ranchers from neighboring properties, each armed and grim-faced. The sheriff tipped his hat to Rose before addressing Webster. Seems we have a complaint about armed trespassers threatening legal property owners. Webster's face had gone from red to pale. This is a private business discussion, Sheriff. Nothing that concerns law enforcement. Threatening people with guns isn't business, it's attempted robbery, Judge Harmon interjected. And possibly conspiracy to commit murder, depending on what exactly you said before we arrived. The judge turned to Blake and Rose. The Kearneys have filed formal complaints of water theft and property damage. Given the armed nature of this confrontation, I'm inclined to take those complaints very seriously. Webster's men shifted uneasily, clearly reconsidering the wisdom of their employer's tactics. Webster himself seemed to deflate, his bluster evaporating in the face of legal authority backed by armed men. This isn't over, Kearney, he blustered, but the threat sounded hollow. Actually, I think it is, Sheriff Dalton countered. Mr. Webster, you and your men will ride with us back to Pecos. The judge has some questions, and I have cells that need filling. What followed was an orderly but firm escort of Webster and his men away from Triple K land. As they disappeared over the rise, Blake turned to Rose, his expression a mixture of pride, relief, and lingering concern. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen, he said, reaching for her hand. Riding out to face armed men. I couldn't let you face them alone, Rose replied simply. This is our fight, remember? Blake's features softened as he brought her hand to his lips. I remember. Though next time, perhaps we could agree on a less dangerous strategy. Next time, Rose agreed with a smile, though I hope there won't be one. There wasn't. The evidence against Webster proved overwhelming once authorities began a formal investigation. His empire collapsed under legal scrutiny, revealing years of corrupt practices and outright theft. The water rights were restored to their proper owners, and the valley's smaller ranchers formed a cooperative to protect their shared interests moving forward. Triple K flourished in the aftermath, expanding its operations as neighboring ranchers who decided to move on offered their land for sale at fair prices. Blake and Rose managed the growth carefully, mindful of maintaining the close-knit community that had become the heart of their success. Their personal happiness expanded as well with the birth of their first child, a son they named Thomas, after Blake's father, followed 2 years later by twins. A boy and girl who tested their parents' energy, but multiplied their joy. 5 years after their wedding, as they sat on the porch of the main house watching their children play in the evening light, Rose was struck by how completely her life had transformed from that desperate day in Pecos. What are you thinking about so intently? Blake asked, his arm comfortably around her shoulders. The day we met, Rose admitted. How close I came to giving up entirely. Blake's arm tightened around her. I'm grateful every day that you didn't. "I was so broken then," she said softly. "I couldn't see any way forward." "We all break sometimes," Blake replied, his voice gentle. "It's what happens afterward that matters." Rose turned to face him, the love of years deepening the connection between them. "I remember what you said that night during the blizzard about things being stronger where they've been mended." "Still believe that," Blake confirmed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Look at us. Look at what we've built together." Rose followed his gaze across the prosperous ranch, the well-maintained buildings, the healthy cattle grazing in distant fields, their children's laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Triple K was more than a successful business. It was a community, a family, a home in the deepest sense. "I was thinking about that moment in the schoolhouse," she said. "During the Webster confrontation, I was terrified, but I knew we'd win because we were fighting for something that mattered." "We were," Blake agreed. "We still are in different ways." Rose leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "I never thought I could be this happy again. After losing so much, I was afraid to even try." "I remember," Blake said softly. "I'm too broken. You sobbed that night of the storm." "And I told you, then let me hold the pieces together," Rose finished, the memory clear despite the years that had passed. "And you have, Blake, every day since." Blake kissed her then, a tender affirmation of promises kept and love deepened by shared struggles and joys. When they parted, his eyes held hers with the same warmth that had first drawn her in that fateful evening in Pecos. "Best thing I ever did," he said simply, stopping to help a stubborn woman on the general store steps. Rose smiled, her heart full. "Best thing I ever did was letting you." As the sun set over Triple K Ranch, casting long shadows across the land they had defended and nurtured together, Rose O'Malley Kearney reflected on the journey that had brought her here from broken pieces to a life more complete than she had ever dared to imagine. The West had taken much from her, but it had given back more. Strength she hadn't known she possessed, purpose in building something lasting, and love that didn't simply hold her broken pieces together, but transformed them into something stronger and more beautiful than before. In the distance, their eldest son called out, having spotted a shooting star streaking across the darkening sky. Blake rose, extending his hand to her in a gesture that echoed their first meeting. Rose took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of hearts that had found their home in each other. Together, they walked toward their children and the future they continued to build, not perfect, not without challenges, but theirs to share in all its imperfect beauty. And that, Rose knew with bone-deep certainty, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.